Now we definitely can strike California, and it seems like the ultimate goal is to be able to kill the president of the United States, like physically, because it seems we project their own mentality. Like the only way to threaten them and say, Kim Jong-un, you would die if you do that. And they want to say the same to whoever is like in White House. Currently, like President Trump, you threaten us and you die. You, not anyone else. You person.
So before we jump into your book, The Accidental Tyrant, talking about North Korea's dictatorship going back to the 1940s, for people that aren't too familiar with North Korea, and you're living in Seoul in South Korea, and I believe Seoul is like 31 miles to the North Korean border, so you're pretty close there to North Korea. But I think when people hear North Korea, they probably don't have a whole lot of idea what North Korea is. So can you kind of set this up by talking about North Korea? Like, what's daily life like?
Well, North Korea is like your extreme version of an authoritarian dictatorship, a country which would make something like China look like a completely free and democratic society. For starters, there is no internet there unless it's personally authorized by the supreme leader. And for those who can actually use it occasionally, there would be a person reported to the secret police sitting physically next to you in the same room. Like imagine a person like here, looking at the monitor and making notes of all the sites you visit. International calls are not permitted. Portraits of the supreme leaders, all three of them, are supposed to be hanged on a special wall inside every apartment. And if you damage these portraits, you are very, very lucky if you go to prison, because most likely you'll just be executed.
Wow. So when you're saying that China looks free compared to North Korea, that's a pretty bleak picture.
Well, it's not me. It's actually like there is a story about like an old North Korean woman who escaped to China in her 60s. And when people ask her, what do you think, like, what are your thoughts of China? She said, like, I've never lived in a democratic country before, but now I know what an open society is. And that was about modern China.
Have you ever been to North Korea for your studies and your research?
Yes, I have been to North Korea, right. I mean, I can't go now because I'm a naturalized South Korean, but back in the day when I was Russian citizen, I went there twice in 2014 and 2017. The problem is that unlike each and every other country, you can't just go on your own. So if you go as a tourist, you can't walk in Pyongyang, you can't talk to the locals. You only go on a tour, which is very, very regulated. And even if you have a nicer guide, and my guides were like awesome, you can only have a very, very brief exchange with the locals, limited to like 20 seconds or something.
Right. So basically, you have like a chaperone the entire time you're in North Korea. They take you to only certain places they want to see, and you can't even have conversations with locals if you're at a restaurant or something like that. It seems pretty stringent. Yeah.
I mean, you can say it looks nice, or thank you for the meal, or like you can do like very, very limited amount of small talk, but otherwise you exist in a bubble. And I speak Korean language. I mean, even that doesn't quite help.
So how did you get fascinated? How did you get turned on to the topic of North Korea, and in particular about the leadership in North Korea?
Well, I mean, originally I was in my middle school when I read a book about North Korea written by quite a famous scholar, Andrei Lankov, and I was just flabbergasted how different North and South Korea is, because like the country which used to be one which was separated largely by accident, and now you can't find two like countries which share a border and have such a huge difference if you just look at the economy only. So number one pair would be South and North Korea. From what I heard, number two is Yemen and Oman, and number three is the United States and Mexico. So yeah, and as of a history, it's just like you think how, like, what's the real origin of it? What's the cornerstone? Who made it? And it all comes back to the founder, to Kim Il-sung, because he made the country what it is. It's to a very large extent, I would say 70 to 80%, it's still a very Kim Il-sung-esque country.
And he passed away was it in the 1980s, correct?
1994, July.
Was 1994? Right.
So more than 30 years before, and his grandson rules the country just as he wanted, and he's still venerated there as a demigod.
There's a lot of wars in the 20th century. Obviously, in World War I, World War II, Vietnam War. And then, of course, there was the Korean War, which is called like the Forgotten War. Of course, if you're in the part of the world where you're at, it's not forgotten. But basically, King, was it Kim Il-sung, the first one? He came to power right after World War II with the help of the Soviets. So do you want to talk about how the leadership started in World War II area?
Well, I mean, it's a long story, but largely all goes to the power vacuum, because there was no one there who was qualified from the point of view of the Soviets. There was no obvious leader to appoint when Stalin conquered North Korea, and like all documents actually show that he was completely disinterested in the peninsula, and was largely invited there by Churchill and Roosevelt. So when it actually happened, and then he started pondering what to do with these, like half of Japanese colony. Korea used to be a Japanese colony until 1945. One of potential candidates which was ultimately chosen was Kim Il-sung. At the time, he was a captain in the Soviet army, so his biography is quite tumultuous. His family leaves Korea in 1919 after an unsuccessful uprising against Japan. He stays in Manchuria, like what is now known as China. Then these territories also conquered by the Japanese. He joins the guerrilla resistance, is crushed. He escapes to the Soviet Union. He is directly commissioned as captain, and he serves there. And that's what probably propelled him to power, because first, he spoke fluent Russian. He was very talented when it came to languages. Second, he was sufficiently native and sufficiently Soviet, so he wouldn't look like a Soviet-appointed overlord, but he was also like an officer of the Red Army, comrade to these generals who were the ultimate decision-makers. And it seems like in December 1945, Stalin ultimately made his decision.
In the 1990s, there's massive famine. I believe was it something like 3 million North Koreans died from starvation, and it seemed like a lot of it coincided with the breakup of the USSR and the fall of communism, is kind of starting in 1989 and going up until 1992, because the Soviets gave a bunch of money and resources, oil, electricity, things like that to North Korea. I've read some books in preparation, and they say that North Korea used to be more prosperous than South Korea. I mean, one, is that true, or is that North Korea propaganda? And if that is true, was it because North Korea was essentially propped up by both China and the USSR?
Well, I'd say it's probably like the only time that North Korea might have been more prosperous than the South. It's like just before the Korean War, because the Soviets did invest a lot in the country, and most importantly, before the war, market economy, well, semi-market economy was permitted in the North, allowing like for small businesses to exist. Then the war devastates the peninsula, and even since 1953, I don't think North Korea has ever been more prosperous than the South. So the North Korean economy, at least from the 1960s, has been a parasitic one, and they were greatly helped by the Sino-Soviet split. Remember the time then, like the Communist China and Soviet Union were bitter enemies. So North Korea actually managed to sign treaty of alliance with both of them, and they milked both of the cows. So go to the Soviets, say we are good friends, give us stuff, or we'll go to it's evil Chinese. And meanwhile, your guy in Beijing does like the same, just flipping the script. So the problem is we lost both sponsors. There was no USSR to left, and like late Gorbachev period, the Soviet leadership said, well, no more free stuff. And Kim Il-sung also felt extremely betrayed by the Chinese, because the Chinese had opened an embassy here in South Korea, which for Kim Il-sung was like, if they slapped him physically, I don't think he would have reacted to that violently. So relationship collapsed, we lost sponsors, the terrible economy, which was aimed at direct centralization, and so that the supreme leader could control it all in real time, collapsed. Also, he died, and his insecure son came into power, and that's how it happened. I think, from what I heard, like 3 million is like a really high estimate. Mostly it's about like 1 million, but still it's it's a huge tragedy. It's the biggest tragedy which East Asia has seen ever since like Great Leap Forward in Japanese China.
How poor is North Korea? It seems like, they don't really report any of their numbers. They're pretty secretive with things like that. I mean, if you look at some of the GDP numbers, it's like 155th of all the countries, something like that. Do you think that's accurate, or what's the relative poverty of North Korea, I guess?
Oh, well, I mean, when you look at GDP per capita, it equals countries like Mozambique, really poor African nations. I mean, there is, of course, like a setup, because North Korea is has a reasonably existing infrastructure, like if you compare it to, say, Madagascar, or North Korea has extraordinary high education rates, because almost 100% of the people have primary and secondary education, but still the economic system built by the state is aimed not at keeping population prosperous, but as fueling military industry. It's all about making one pocket of efficiency, which is strategic weaponry, on which we're extraordinarily successful. Remember, before Kim Jong-un took power in 2011, they didn't have a functioning missile. Most of the missile tests actually ended in a failure. Now they definitely can strike California, and it seems like the ultimate goal is to be able to kill the president of the United States, physically, because it seems to project their own mentality. The only way to threaten them and say, Kim Jong-un, you will die if you do that. And they want to say the same to whoever is in White House. Currently, President Trump, you threaten us and you die. You, not anyone else. You person.
I think the one thing that most people know about North Korea is the missiles and the nuclear capabilities. So, I mean, you think that's all that stuff is true, so that's not propaganda that they actually have these.
They definitely have missiles, right? I mean, the capability of striking, say, San Francisco anywhere in California is not disputed, or Hawaii. They definitely have an atomic bomb. There is no consensus of whether they have a hydrogen bomb. They had a test which we claimed that was it. We don't quite know if it's some variation of a standard nuke, but they might very well have it now, because the work never stops. I mean, when they say something about peace and engagement, they never ever mean it. If it would be another summit, remember, these countries would not surrender nuclear weapons ever unless there is a regime change.
What's their end game, I guess? What's the goal? You mentioned in the book, the Kim dynasty is essentially the longest family dynasty outside of a monarchy in the world. And I mean, like I said, they're already on the grandson. I imagine the great-grandson will take over after Kim Jong-un is no longer around. But what's the actual end game?
Keeping this as it is in eternity. For the founder, for the main character in my book, for Kim Il-sung, the goal was conquest of South Korea, or just collapse of South Korea. He was extremely envious of the Vietnamese because North Vietnam actually managed to unify the country. As of now, the relative from the second generation is that we want to keep it forever. And missiles and nukes are just a precaution for them, because the idea is that they feel threatened, they feel they saw the fall of Iraq, they saw the fall of Libya, and I guess even fate of Ukraine is also another example, because Ukraine voluntarily surrendered nuclear weapons and ultimately got invaded by Russia. So they say, well, they think that only nuclear weapons would guarantee the survival of the regime, and the idea is to pass power down to another generation. This time it may actually be a daughter, not a son, but no one knows, no decision is made. But there is an understanding that it will be kept inside the Kim family, and maybe another generation and another and another. I mean, the regime could, anything could happen. It could collapse next year. It could very well leave in the 22nd century.
You mentioned in the book how ultimately unification is not the goal, because if you were to have North and South Korea unified, well, then, like you mentioned in the book, basically the political center would probably be Seoul, South Korea. So if you're a dictator, you'd be giving up a lot of your power, which, I've read the Dictator's Handbook, which is a pretty interesting book, talks about how these dictators actually maintain their power. Like a unified Korea essentially means the Kim family would be obsolete, so to speak, right?
Right. I mean, the only realistic scenario is a revolution in the north, like ecstasy here in the south. Well, finally, we'll be one nation which will override all the economic concerns and unification German style. And if you look at how Germany is faring, they're not faring quite well. It's still very much a divided nation, and East Germany was one of the richest parts of the socialist bloc and one of the freest countries, well, least unfree countries in the socialist bloc. North Korea is exactly the opposite. It's like, imagine like if the UK would annex all of its ex-African colonies and give like to all people, say, in Zimbabwe or Nigeria, British passports. That would be like the magnitude of the social change. If it happens, like no one here, like life of every single South Korean, including like yours truly naturalized one, would be affected permanently, and this country would never be the same again.
I was reading a book. I think it was I forget the name of it. I think it might have been A Capitalist in North Korea, I think it was called. The guy was from Sweden, and he worked in like the pharmacy space in North Korea for like 7 years. But he said a lot of the South Koreans didn't want unification at all because their quality of life would go down substantially as they're essentially funding a lot of stuff. I think was it like estimated that it would be a couple $1 trillion just to get North Korea to build the infrastructure to have it on par with South Korea. So essentially everyone in South Korea would then be poor as well. So he was basically saying people in South Korea don't even want unification.
Oh, well, I mean, some people do because it used to be such a major part of the national identity, but as time goes by, the lower and lower it goes. It's still, I think, like the sort of general weak support, like one day it would be good, is over 50%, but it's slowly dying out. I mean, you'll need a constitutional amendment because it's the territorial claim to North Korea and the UN for Unification Articles 3 and 4 here, so you need to change that. But, I mean, the thing is, it's like, if the British analogy is not as good, well, imagine like Nigeria and Zimbabwe being admitted to the United States. How unpopular that would be, especially given how many people there are there. If they all vote, if they get into the electoral college, I mean, anyone who would even propose that would be like, are you insane, despite them being English-speaking countries? And that's the attitude which is slowly but steadily brewing here.
How have they maintained power for so long? There's a lot of propaganda you mentioned about how they have to wear the patches, and there's basically no internet. If you get on the internet, you have to have approval from the supreme leader himself. But we're in 2025. I mean, how is it that they've maintained this dictatorship, even with all this technology?
So extreme isolation, as I said, like international calls are not permitted, and lots of stuff like people like in America and here, or like even in China or Russia would take for granted are not permitted there at all. Propaganda extreme and not based on a black list but on a white list, which means everything is banned unless explicitly permitted, and of course terror. And you don't give people any space for public expression because like they can't even like go into some forum in the darknet and talk, and break the society, and you punish anyone who resists harshly. Once again, you damage the portrait, especially on purpose, execution. You talk like you listen to foreign radio, 5 years of labor camp. And there are also extrajudicial punishments, such as banishment of your entire family into some faraway place. And so punishing relatives. Actually, Kim Il-sung did it more like now it's at least less, a tiny bit less horrible than it used to be. Loads and loads of states, what state can do. And once again, the doctrine is never ever reform, never concede, always double down.
Do you think that there'll be a collapse in, I don't know, North Korea in the next, like, say, 10 years? I mean, if you read books from like the 90s and early 2000s, they were always projecting that North Korea would collapse within a few years, and we're in 2025 and that hasn't been the case. And like you mentioned, they were even able to make a nuclear weapon recently.
I would refrain from making any predictions. It's just because I don't trust my own intuition. For example, like I made a mistake in 2022 that I said they would definitely won't send any soldiers to Russia because it looks so obvious, because it's such a dangerous thing to just send your soldiers to another country, which they never did before. And they did send it. So once again, as I said, they might collapse, they might survive, they might very much outlive me, and I'm only 37, and my children, if there are any.
What do you think the lessons are for other countries and to take away from North Korea?
Well, I mean, the thing is, the triumph of democracy is not automatic, and once entrenched, dictatorship could persist for a long, long, long time in its all brutal, hyper-Stalinist form. It's quite a terrible lesson.
If you read a lot of newspapers and magazines now, they say the world is becoming a lot more fascist and authoritarian. Do you think that's true? I mean, if you look at North Korea, which actually is authoritarian, I'm in the U.S. and I always hear about how Trump's a fascist dictator and all this, and we're still kind of doing what we want. I always kind of think that seems a little ridiculous, especially when you have a real life case like, say, North Korea, where you can't even go online, or if you say something about the supreme leader that's bad, I mean, they literally kill you. They publicly execute you. Even to this day, like the word fascist to describe Trump is not correct.
It's an absolute nonsense. People exaggerate all the time. I think President Trump is quite a populist guy, yes, and I think he has maybe less respect towards democratic institutions than some of his predecessors. He's not a fascist at all. It's unfortunately, people tend to use like very grandiose language. When they see someone who's like seriously left-wing, they scream communist. When they see someone who's right-wing, who they don't like, it's fascist. Like war crimes, and whenever like there are war crimes committed, it's always genocide. Thing is, it's a bit like a North Korean way of doing things, because North Korea likes screech and using like extremely high-level rhetoric. It's always like the thrice cursed traitor of the people whom we should execute immediately, something like that. I would say, let's have a civil discussion. Let's not forget that, say President Trump was democratically elected, and I don't think it's in a debate. And maybe if you want people like to have a different opinion, first what you should say is refrain from using some obscure, like really, really strange labels. He's not a fascist, of course.
Right now in the world, do you think North Korea would be the worst place to live then, if you're an actual citizen?
Well, I think you probably you can find some worse place, but North Korea is a very green place, and if you have a yearning for freedom and something, you will be really, really in a bad situation. But the thing is, there are places in our world where you just survival is not guaranteed. Say Sudan, which is in a state of a civil war, which is super poor. Somalia, which is not even a country, it's a collapsed hellhole, especially outside of Somaliland. If you're a woman, Afghanistan. We all know how Taliban treats people there. And so the war zones, say what is going on in Ukraine or in other countries. But North Korea would probably get in the top 10 positions. But I would say it's if you are more concerned with things outside of your physical survival, it would be definitely one of the worst, if not the worst, because the propaganda is everywhere and you can't stay neutral. You either praise the supreme leader or you die.
Going back to that book, A Capitalist in North Korea, he basically I said he lived in North Korea for 7 years. He liked North Korea. And then he basically said that a lot of the propaganda that comes out, or he calls it propaganda that comes out on North Korea, is from defectors who, mostly go to South Korea. And he says that they bash North Korea because they're essentially just a bunch of losers who didn't have good jobs. He says then they don't actually work in South Korea, but they usually get paid by the CIA or other intelligence groups to exaggerate stories and make North Korea seem worse than it was. When I was reading the book, I'm thinking like maybe this guy works for the CIA of North Korea or something, because he basically was saying it was one of the best places to live, and he, like it's not as bad as people say it is, and people in North Korea are happy. He says maybe not the happiest people in the world, but they like their life, and whatnot. I mean, do you think that these defectors that leave North Korea are working for the CIA and providing propaganda, or no?
No, I think it's highly unlikely, especially since working for the American intelligence would still be treason even in South Korea. I mean, we are allies, yeah, but it's another country. Second, actually, like on that regards, I talked to one guy who fled the country in 79, and North Korea and South Korea, like, he is a democracy only since 87. So at the time it was the authoritarian right-wing dictatorship. And I asked him directly, did they want you to lie about the North? And he said, no, they didn't want me to lie, but like the understanding was that I would be focused on bad things, not on good things. And that was under a dictatorship. As of now, like, I don't think like the National Intelligence Service, which is our CIA here in South Korea, I don't think they pay people to like actively lie. At least I haven't heard about any single case. But of course, like this is not just a community of honest people, although there are people who just lie to get money. If you actually look at Amazon top stories of North Korea in English, yeah, lots of them would be quite dodgy stories. Like Yeonmi Park, for example, who's usually number one in North Korea. I have heard like many things how his story contradicts itself. Like Escape from Camp 14, it has been proven that the guy lied. He was he claimed he was born in a concentration camp. His story is still quite horrible, but less. So he was just imprisoned in a less harsher labor camp. So the thing is, like, each and every story has to be fact-checked again and again and again. But if you see just like a person telling you which doesn't look like bullshit, then it's probably not bullshit, Like, people don't usually lie just because we are immigrants.
You pronounce her name, is it Yeonmi Park? Is that how you pronounce her name? Like
in Korean, it's Park Yeon-mi. It's like here, like family name goes first, like first name goes last. In English, well, you tell me you're a native speaker. Yeon-mi Park, I guess.
Yeah, that sounds right. And I just I've seen a bunch of her on podcasts and stuff. I always liked her. I didn't realize there's people that actually say that how much of her story are they saying is made up or not accurate then?
I don't know. Like, I mean, I can't say for sure. All what I heard is like there are contradictions and it's exaggerated. I mean, if you want to record something of that, I have to like very thoroughly like give this book a proper reading and with a pen. I mean, I can't just say it with details. And for any of our listeners, well, just read it with caution and make your own. In conclusion, once again, my judgment can be flawed, easily so. Well, I already gave you an example. If you start in North Korea, you still don't know so many things.
How many languages do you speak?
Fluently, like 3, including my native Russian, so that's English and Korean in addition. I read in about, I guess, a dozen, but it doesn't really count because when your native is Russian, you can read in almost all Slavic languages. I learned some French, because my mom is a French teacher. My dad speaks Chinese, so I was born in a very, very lucky family when it comes. My dad actually once interpreted for Gorbachev in Taiwan.
When you're researching for the North Korea, I mean, like, you're actually reading in Korean, you're reading in primary source material, but how hard is it to find material on the Kims? Because like you mentioned, a lot of it, like, there's not much written by him, and if there is, a lot of it could be potentially propaganda, right? So
right.
How are you able to where are you able to find material? And also, like, because it was they had a big influence with the Russians and the Soviets. Is there a lot of material that you read actually in your native Russian? Is that really handy? Or is it more like the Korean that you're reading this stuff in?
Well, I mean, these are 2 primary languages. If you look at my sources, most of them would be either in Korean or in Russian, because like the Soviet Union is what created that country. And, when I left Russia in 2022, Most of his sources until 1979 were declassified already. So yeah, that also helped, especially in the early period when the Soviet influence was immense. As of later times, so there are some documents which were taken by the United States Army during the Korean War. There are some leaks from North Korea, and I have like quite a substantial amount of classified documents scanned from various sources. I mean, usually, like, I guess the most prolific is NHK, Japanese television, because they have a huge budget and they meet with smugglers in China and buy North Korean stuff. You can also learn a lot from reading the old propaganda, which was less censored, especially in the stories which were later twisted. For example, like one issue of the primary newspaper, Rodon Shinmun, acknowledged where Kim Il-sung was actually born. Not in Mangyongdae, like they show, but in a neighboring village where his mom was from. And you read, of course, everyone, like all the memoirs of the escapees, and but basically you have to read everything in every possible language. After some obscure Japanese magazines, there would be an interview with some lady who, in her teens, was a maid at Kim Il-sung's family, or you read some really strange and small publication in China, where would be some memoirs by a Chinese diplomat. Like, I guess the strangest source of all I had was published in Russian in the United States by some emigre community, and some guy whom I have never heard made, actually had information about the birth of Kim Jong-il, North Korea's second leader, and it very much, fits all the known documents, including the names I later found in Russian archives. So, and it was published in Baltimore and in Russian. So you see, the world is full of wonders, and you have to find them all.
In the book, you talk a little bit about the opulence that the Kim dynasty family has, and I was trying to figure out how much money the Kims are worth, and it says maybe $5 billion at the minimum. Obviously, they don't really know because there's no good data to know. But then I was also trying to figure out what's a typical wage for the typical North Korean, and they have it at between $1 and $3 US a month, which is insanely low. You think Kim Jong-un is really worth $5 billion?
I mean, you just look at the North Korean budget, and that's his property. He owns the country. I mean, he is not really an elected official. He is more like an absolute monarch. And Finny is like a country even boasts about how wealthy the supreme leader is, because it's an expression of the greatest loyalty of the people, like they say. As of the official wage, yes, it's laughably small. That's why the entire country survives on bribery and black market.
Wow. So you're talking something similar to like Venezuela.
Good analogy, actually, yes. I think Venezuela, from what I heard, I'm no specialist in Latin America, but I heard, after an economic collapse, we have something like that. But in North Korea, you would just starve if you don't take bribes. So everyone takes bribes. And the unofficial market economy, or the economy of marketplaces, perhaps we could say that, it has existed at least since the 1990s. The state tries to suppress it because it challenges its monopoly, but people just refuse to let it go because the alternative is starvation. And when it comes to your physical survival, everyone could be pretty desperate. So lots of attempts to crush them completely have so failed. It seems like as of now, Kim Jong-un, his strategy is to sell lots and lots of ammunition to the Russians, receive lots of stuff for Putin, and basically restart the good old parasitic economy where your economic failures are compensated by some sugar daddy. Currently, the sugar daddy is Vladimir Putin.
Your book is called The Accidental Tyrant, and I believe it was the 1980s or the 1990s, you mentioned there was a plan to actually take out the first Kim with a tank.
Right.
And then that plan ended up not working. Has there been many attempts to try to actually take out some of the Kims? I mean, or is that just one that that was documented? Can you kind of talk about that story, and is that like a one-off?
So I actually going to shamelessly promote my next book because it's about that. Pioneer on the Brink, which will be published by Hearst in 2026. In spring 2026, if everything goes well, will be just about that, about the turning points, the moments which shaped North Korea. I outlined 16 scenarios how things could have potentially been different. As of outright rebellion against the Kims, like the military attempts, we have been at least two, one in 1992, one in 1995. In 1992, yes, there were people who were educated in the Soviet Union in Perestroika era who were conspiring to shoot the Kims by using a tank, and unfortunately their tank wasn't allowed to participate in the parade. They wanted to do it. Another one was an attempt to create a full-scale military uprising in North Korean city of Chongjin, near the Sea of Japan. It's like the only place which also has a foreign presence. There are Russian and Chinese consulates there. So yeah, these are two attempts, and they have been more like conspiracies by the elite. They have been a case of Kim Il-sung planning the Second Korean War, lots and lots of potential alternative outcomes. North Korean leadership survived, sometimes by skill, sometimes by sheer luck.
We were talking about the Kim Jong-un being worth maybe $5 billion. What about people in his inner circle? Like when you're in North Korea, is there a clear hierarchy of people that are at the top of the party? I mean, are some of those billionaires as well? I mean, they obviously have to be doing well in order to continue on the regime, so to speak. Like, what's in it for them?
Right. So the elite understands that if the unification comes, that North Korea disappears and they could all be put on trial. And the idea is, well, currently we are wealthy. Yes, maybe the supreme leader is not the best man, but the alternative is probably prison, and we don't want that. And that's what unifies them. The fear that any change would result in complete disintegration of North Korea and absorption by the South. Because you can't just create a semi-authoritarian regime or even a democracy in North Korea. Like North Korea would cease to exist as a concept. That's at least what they fear. Yes, we are all pretty wealthy, and there is no clear hierarchy. There is no clear number two. I mean, recently we actually created a position of number two, which never existed, but it seems like it's vacant. So there is a post now called First Secretary who would step in case something happens to the General Secretary who's in charge. But it seems no one is currently there. It's maybe kept for some emergencies or a potential successor. And in China, in the standing committee, they have everyone listed. We know who's number 1 to number 7. In North Korea, we only know who's number 1. Well, and many people who were speculated to be number 2s were very clearly purged. Say, there was a guy called Hwang Bin-so, and I remember South Korea explicitly calling him North Korean number 2. He's gone. He is probably a middle-ranking officer after Kim Jong-un demoted him. I mean, these governments like that, there is no protection. I mean, say, President of Iran, who's number 2 after the supreme leader, he has some constitutional protection because there is some degree of institutional support for him in Iran. In North Korea, there is none. There is no will by the will of the supreme leader. It's a perfect dictatorship.
Yeah, in the Dictator's Handbook, I mean, it talks about that. Why would you ever give up power or try to go to a democracy if you're an authoritarian? Because you will be in prison the rest of your life for crimes against humanity, or most likely you'll just end up being killed. Your family will be killed. All the upper elite leadership will be killed. You have nothing to gain by going from the authoritarian regime to a democratically elected, at least for the people that are at the highest levels of the government.
Right. I mean, this is all correct. If you look at how it actually happened in similar regimes, I think the only thing which could make a start a reform would be physical concern for their own survival. Because say East Germany had a very similar problem, and then they only started the reform when the Minister of State Security said we are losing control of the country, something might happen. And in Albania, which used to be like a hyper-authoritarian regime, like by far the most authoritarian in Eastern Europe, the Politburo only kick-started the reform when we were just afraid that angry mob would storm the building and physically like beat them all to death. Yeah, so fear of survival is the only power which could compel them, but it doesn't seem like likely in the immediate future.
The supreme leader, King Jong-un, is only 41 years old right now. And so it seems, right, it seems like he's fairly young. What is didn't his grandfather live to be in his 80s, right? So, and then like you said that he has 2 kids. It's possible that the next supreme leader is not even born yet, as he's only 41. If he lives to be another, right? Yeah, like it's like who knows what the secession plan will be, because he is still a fairly young person in the grand scheme of leaders of countries.
Right. I mean, he's extremely unhealthy because he smokes, he drinks, and he's morbidly obese. Right. But let's also not forget that he has the best Medicare in the country, and he can use the entire budget of North Korea for his august body. Yeah, so it's very possible when he'll just stay in power for another half of a century, like easily. So it's like 2025 now. Who knows, maybe in 2075 he would still be with us. Possibly. 91 then. Like Robert Mugabe in Zimbabwe, remember how old was he and how long he stayed in power?
I had a guest on, I think his name was Jeffrey White. He wrote a book on cryptocurrency, and he was talking about how North Korea would steal people's crypto, and like they're big into online scams and things like that, which is interesting considering that like the average person in North Korea doesn't have access to the internet. Is that true? You think that they have these hackers in North Korea doing different crypto scams?
Well, I heard, all the reports I heard conclude that it's likely true, but because remember, like the country is very, very bad, but there are small pockets of efficiency. So we are not talking about like an average North Korean having access to internet. Of course we don't, but there is a unit inside the General Department of Intelligence, if I'm not mistaken. Well, basically like in the huge organization which unites all intelligence agencies into one. So there is a unit there, then there are a bunch of men, all men, no women. It's a hugely patriarchal society, who are given advanced training in computers, and because like all the resources are put there, yes, they are granted internet access by the authorization of the Supreme Leader, of course, and they're very, very, very efficient. Lots of hacker attacks in recent times have spectrum of Korea. I've heard like they got hundreds of millions or maybe even $1 billion is stolen in cryptocurrency. North Korea is basically like a very hungry stray dog, and when a dog sends meat or like money in case of North Korea, they would be very, very aggressive in getting them.
As you speak and read multiple languages, when you're doing the research, is there anything that was super fascinating that maybe didn't make the book?
Okay, so there is one fact which I uncovered after like Accidental Tyrant came out, which is I think I sort of managed to nail the date where Kim Il-sung was appointed the Supreme Leader, and the date is probably 17th of December 1945. So my logic is that by early December, he's not yet appointed. We know it from the Soviet documents because we don't talk about him like as he is appointed. In December, the huge event which happens, we put him in charge of the party. And this has to be done by Joseph Stalin. And it happens on the 18th of December, so it's before that. The thing is, like, in the entire autumn of 45, Stalin is on vacation, and he takes a break from governing the country. And there is a rumor by one of the top Soviet generals. He said, like, the person who recommended Kim to Stalin was Lavrentiy Beria, who was in charge, like, on the secret police of the nuclear project and, like, one of Stalin's closest confidant. So if you look at the list of, like, because Stalin comes back from the vacation on 17th of December and has just one day, and then Kim is appointed. And the last one in the list of visitors is Lavrentiy Beria. So it probably happened on the 17th of December. Quite proud of that discovery.
Right. So that's the first time that date has been uncovered, basically, by researchers, right? It was
right,
which is pretty impressive. Yeah. Is there anything else that you think was quite shocking or unexpected?
I mean, there are lots of unusual trivias. Like, for example, it seems like he had one brother erased from history because his very early biographies, when he is already like the cult, surges in the 60s, but before the modern canon is formed in 67, you can find some mention of his adopted brother, like of a kid who was adopted by his father. And for some reason, this man, whose name was Kim Jong-ho, is completely erased from narrative, and even his existence is not acknowledged. Well, so you see, even his family is not what they usually teach us. I mean, there are lots of other falsifications, like his son wasn't born in 42, he was born in 41, and they later changed the year just to create a nicely looking 30-year gap. North Korea wasn't actually established on the 9th of September 48. Nothing happened on the day it's a falsification invented. The party foundation date is also fake. Really, party was founded on the 13th of October, not on the 10th, and goes on and on and on. It's really a country, to borrow a Soviet joke, of a very unpredictable past.
Since we're discussing your book, The Accidental Tyrant, today, just kind of two final questions. One, where can people find your book, get a hold of it if they want to, or get a hold of your research, as you do have a lot of different papers? And then the final question would be, just kind of leave us with a final thought, either related to The Accidental Tyrant or maybe another project you're working on, something that you wanted to discuss that we didn't talk about today.
Well, I mean, final thought would be like the main message of the book, that history is much less determined than we think. Like, some really good things can happen, but also some really awful things that no one could predict could happen. And there is no guarantee for the triumph of democracy, for the ultimate, like, end of history, to borrow Francis Fukuyama's decision. Like, we made history. There is no fate. And I guess that's sort of like the message of the book. And it's not necessarily hopeful, because there is no fate also means that evil can prevail.
Where do you recommend people get the book at and things like that as well?
Amazon.com, the best.
Yeah, it's wherever. And I guess, just kind of with your final thought is saying evil can prevail. And as we talked about earlier, but do you think, because I always read it in newspapers, how the world is headed towards more authoritarian regimes. I mean, do you think that's actually true? I mean, they always talk about, Europe, Europe countries. I mean, anytime the mainstream media says these countries are going more to the far right, to me, that means like you're being more conservative. That doesn't mean that you're going towards dictatorship. Like, it's just the liberal media doesn't like conservatives. So anything conservative is like, they're the next hit. Yeah, but like we always hear this narrative. Do you think that narrative is true, or like you said, is that just hyperbole, like you kind of were talking about earlier with Trump?
I think it's a great exaggeration of reasonably existing trend. There is definitely a rise of dangerous populism or authoritarian-ish tendencies, or sometimes if you look at Turkey or Russia, of actually authoritarian governments. Yes, I'd say, say in the United Kingdom, Reform UK can very much win the next general election, which will be the first since forever, since the 1920s, not won by the Labour or the Tories. I'd say there is a rise of populism. There is maybe some erosion of democracy, but definitely not fascism, definitely not far right, and actual far right, and people like Ku Klux Klan, or the neo-Nazis, who are and will probably stay extremely marginal group of pathetic, hateful people. Yes, definitely not some people who we should be seriously concerned about.
Yeah, as you kind of just mentioned, with the UK, I mean, I always kind of, with Trump, I always say he's the first independent president to win. I mean, they always talk about in the US, the Uni Party, where you have the Democrats and the Republicans are essentially one party. Even a lot of conservatives didn't like Trump.
Right.
And, so you had like the never Trumper conservative. So I always said like Trump just knew he wasn't going to win the presidency as an independent, as they never do. So he ran as Republican.
I mean, Donald Trump is a remarkably successful figure because first he basically subjugated the Republican Party, which I think is a victory in itself in 2016 when he wins then, and when he wins again in 2024. Yes, I do think he is a remarkably skilled politician, at least when it comes to winning elections.
With social media, you're mentioning like, in North Korea, the government controls that, locks it down. It just seems to me like in other countries, the average person is waking up to these politicians are getting rich. Like, why are these politicians like Nancy Pelosi in the U.S. that should be making like $180,000 a year or whatever? She's worth $100 million. They're exempt from insider trading, and they always block bills to keep them able to do insider trading. And it just seems like now with social media, people are kind of waking up to what's actually going on. And then the elite reaction is like, oh, these people, like if you voted for Trump, you're just you're a racist, misogynist. Only dumb people would agree with them. It is, and you're seeing this in Europe, like you mentioned. You're seeing it in a lot of other places. I think it's just social media has really changed, is giving people a lot more access to information they would have before. And if you're North Korea and you want to maintain control and power, yeah, you should probably block the internet, because just look what happened in other countries.
I mean, there is no social media there. There is no civil society there. There is no even substitute, because like say China has its own social media like Yuka for YouTube, and Russia tries to create its own messenger marks. But in North Korea, there is no internet, there is no social media, and yes, you can say, yay, there is no cancel culture. Yeah, I mean, there isn't like that, but it's like saying, oh, my head doesn't hurt because I have no head. Unfortunately, when you have political freedom, you also give it to all people, including the people you really dislike or people who are objectively stupid. But that's unfortunately, or I'd say rather fortunately, how it works for both sides.
Yeah, when I always hear hate speech or whatever, it's like, what is a speech that you hate? I mean, I'm not really even sure what that means.
Right. I would say I'm very much here on the American side rather than European side. I'd say First Amendment is one of the most wonderful things which exist in the modern world, and it should be like hate speech shouldn't be censored. People who act like when we hear hateful propaganda, that's a crime.
With your final thought or your final point, when you're talking about the accidental tyrant, going back to the tank story, how much different would North Korea be, though? Like if they actually did pull off that coup. You mentioned Kim Jong-un is really overweight. He has a lot of bad habits. I imagine he's got to be stressed out. He could have a heart attack, and all of a sudden it could change in a second, though, as well, right? With just that accidental death or some freak accident or something.
Right. I mean, both scenarios I discussed once again in my next book, Cursed 2026, Pyongyang on the Brink. Just quickly, if Kim Il-sung would have been killed in 1992, most likely North Korea would have disintegrated very quickly. Partially because it was the spirit of the age, because everyone expected it to disintegrate right about then after the collapse of communism in the Soviet Union and in Eastern Europe. If Kim Jong-un dies now in 2020, well, basically at any time before he appoints a successor, it will lead to an enormous crisis. We would scramble to elect someone else. That is for the first time then power may slip from the hands of the Kim family, because, his closest relative in the top of his sister is not really that high-ranking bureaucrat. And if it ever happens, well, they would have to build a separate identity. The new leader would have to assert himself, probably himself, not himself, against the previous regime. And yes, then some instability might come. But once again, as of now, North Korea is remarkably stable, and it is very likely to be there tomorrow and for the foreseeable future. But you never know. There are lots and lots of surprises. Like one of my favorite examples, Star Trek Next Generation. There was an episode there filmed in 1987, which featured the Soviet Union in the 21st century. Well, how well it worked out.
Before you go, I'm just kind of curious, since you're Russian but you live in Seoul. You said now you got your citizenship in South Korea. How do you like living in Seoul? And I just find it interesting because I taught English in Seoul, South Korea. I was in Jamshel, which is where they had the '88 Olympics, so I kind of have a little bit of familiarity with that city. And I mean, I really liked living in South Korea. I remember I was cycling through New Zealand, and I ran into this South Korean at like a hostel or hotel, I forget. And I was like, "Oh, how do you like New Zealand, you know?" And he's like, "It's not my favorite." And I was like, "Oh, why not?" And he's like, "It just reminds me of South Korea. He's like, it's mountainous, a lot of nature." He's like, "If I wanted that, I could have just stayed home." And I always, when I tell people that story, most people don't picture South Korea as a gorgeous country with massive mountains, and it's on a peninsula, so you're surrounded by water. I think most people probably just think of like Seoul, was it like the second largest city in the world, so they probably think more like a concrete jungle versus one of the more beautiful countries, at least that I've been to.
Well, I'd say, as a person who visited New Zealand twice in this year alone, yes, New Zealand is a paradise, and it's objectively more beautiful than Korea. Korea has its charm, but if you just go to Queenstown on the Southern Island, nothing can compare to the beauty of New Zealand. South Korea is a nice place if you speak the language. If you speak Korean, like, the barrier is surprisingly low, because most people don't just like expect you, if you don't have an Asian appearance, to speak Korean. Once they realize you can, they open their heart. It's cozy, it's convenient, it's nice. I mean, as of culture-wise, I would say I'm not really attuned to the South Korean culture, to K-pop, and to all that. In my heart, I probably like 98% of what we consume for fun would be in English. But that's just me. I mean, lots of people like it, and South Korea has an enormous cultural influence across the world. I guess I'm just not very typical in that regard, because majority of people who come here do not come to study North Korea. They come because of K-pop and of all these stars and boy bands. I probably wouldn't even know the names of.
I enjoyed my time. I was shocked at how much people were into the K-pop. I didn't know what K-pop was till I went to South Korea. When people found out I went there, like, "Oh, how was, like, talking about the K-pop?" I was like, I don't know. I never went to any. I didn't watch the K-pop, I didn't go to any concert or something like that.
Me neither. To give you a level of my ignorance, I only learned about the existence of the probably most famous band BTS largely 5 years after I immigrated into this country. I mean, if you don't pay attention, you can very easily live here in your own bubble there. It doesn't touch you.
Yeah, you mentioned about getting around. When I was in South Korea, when I'd be walking around, I'd be looking around like I was lost or something. I was just checking out the scenery, when people would come up to me like, "Oh, hey, are you lost? You need help?" I mean, people were so friendly. Like, I asked, of course, not everyone, but almost everyone speaks English there, so it was really easy to travel around.
It's a sweet country,
yeah.
Right? People are very helpful, and in a very good way. I like the community here, and also crime rates are very, very low. Yes, crime rates and things. You can leave a wallet, and you'll come back in an hour, and you'll probably still be there.
Yeah, I had a friend that left like a wallet or something like that on a park bench, and like 2 days later went back and it was just sitting in the same spot. Like, and they had a bunch of documents and stuff, as like stuff that would have been really hard to replace in a foreign country. It's hard to get an ID when you don't have an ID.
Right. South Korea probably does have like a mandatory ID, which we check when you have to vote. I heard like there is a great debate about that in the United States. I'd say we have a mandatory national ID, and we haven't become some super authoritarian dictatorship the moment it was implemented. No, it still works, and we are pretty much a functional democracy.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Surprise, surprise. That, just requiring an ID doesn't make you a fascist. I mean,
my dear friends, that is it for this episode of El Podcast. Once again, if you're not yet subscribed, please subscribe on YouTube as well as Rumble. You can also find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts from. We thank you all from the bottom of our hearts for watching and listening, and we will see you on the next episode.